Ransom Olds came from a family that owned a factory that built gasoline engines, so internal combustion was sort of in his blood. He built 11 different models leading up to and including the curved dash Oldsmobile, and of those different models there was a tremendous fire that destroyed the entire factory, and in fact it was the person who sounded the alarm who actually physically rolled one lonely curved dash Oldsmobile out of the factory. They had just this curved dash, and that's where they ended up going into production.
The curved dash Oldsmobile is really a very simple mechanical device. Single cylinder, 4-stroke. I call it a kinetic energy car. Not so much of the power is made in the engine, it's really all there in the flywheel. The most interesting feature is its overall looks. The curved dash Olds is an interesting looking car.
It has a wooden body. It looks a lot like an antique sleigh with a nicely rolled, curved front end, what we'd call the dashboard today, which is really where we get the name curved dash Olds.
Cars were just moving away from being horse-drawn into engine-powered. When you had a horse in front of you and you snapped the reins and it dashed away, it would shower you with mud and debris and anything else that was in the road. So you had this board up there to keep from doing that, and that's where the name came from, dashboard. When the curved dash Olds came out in 1901, you may be the only person in town to own one. Ransom Eli Olds, his mission was to put an automobile in the hands of common people. The price was low enough to buy one, $650, put one in your garage. And even though that was a lot of money in 1901 when they came out.
By comparison, you were looking at $1,500 to $3,000 just to get into an automobile at that time. So it really, right out of the gate, opened up a broad client base for the automobile.
A lot of people think that the Model T was the first mass-produced car. That's actually not true. The curved dash Olds was really, by definition, the first mass-produced car. They built thousands of them. Starting and driving the curved dash Olds is a lot of fun. It's a very predictable car for its time period. The hand crank is on the side, not up front. It's almost like winding up a Victrola record player from the same vintage.
Driving this car, it's different from anything you'll ever put yourself into today. You don't have a steering wheel for starters, which is perhaps the most disconcerting part. You have a tiller in your hand, and no steering wheel means no horn in the middle. You have a little bell, just like a bicycle, to alert people that you're coming. Granted, at the time, a lot of places still used what was known as the red flag law, which meant somebody had to proceed in front of the vehicle by a quarter of a mile, waving a red flag, warning the town that there was an automobile coming. So you're sitting completely in the open. You're not riding in a car, you're really riding on a car. You almost can't see the car beneath you because you're looking at the road ahead. It's sort of like flying on a magic carpet.
Top speed on the curved dash Olds is a variable sort of thing, whether you're heading uphill or down. A downhill with a good tailwind, you probably get 25-30 miles an hour out of it. Uphill depends on how steep the hill is, of course.
In 1903, Lester Whitman and Eugene Hammond decided they were going to drive across the country. It's been referred to as a race. There was a Winton, there was the curved dash Olds, and there was a Packard. They didn't actually line up in San Francisco and somebody dropped the flag and they raced across the country. They were essentially trying to better each other's times. But Hammond and Whitman actually walked through an Oldsmobile lot, a load of curved dash Oldsmobiles that had been delivered. They just picked one out at random. They had a work box built and placed on the back of the car. And at the time, it was the smallest, lightest, most inexpensive vehicle that had crossed the country. My favorite component is that it was so tremendously well documented. We have the pictures with the written word, and those are reflected in a book that was published by Hammond's son called From Sea to Sea in 1903. One of the purposes of the trip was to deliver the official U.S. mail, which was a first as well. They carried the mail from San Francisco to New York City and then continued on a few more days to Portland, Maine, because Whitman was actually from Maine. The trip was the longest journey in an automobile at that time. In 1903, we didn't have a transcontinental highway. We didn't have really even roads. Once you left the city, there were maybe railroad tracks to follow. If you were lucky, you had telegraph lines, so you just followed them along line of sight. There weren't gas stations dotted along the highway. There was no highway. So everything that they needed, they had to plan ahead, know what town they were headed to next, and prepare delivery of spare inner tubes, additional fuel, parts for the vehicle. The desert in the Southwest was one of the biggest stumbling blocks for many of the transcontinental attempts. Traction was really the big problem when you got into the desert sands, and Hammond and Whitman came up with this ingenious workaround that they took old fire hose, stuffed them with cotton rags, and then wrapped them around the tires and used rope to tie them in place. So in addition to the texture of the hose, you also had the texture and the grip that the rope provided, and that was really what saw them through the desert. They were just crossing the open country, and they had to fill in ravines with rocks that they found. They had to walk up and down streams and rivers, finding a spot that they could ford across. There weren't bridges. They weren't lucky enough to have ferries at most of their crossings, so they had to find a way to drive across the waterways. At the end of their trip, they accounted how many gallons of gasoline, and everyone wants to know how these old vehicles do for gas consumption. And they calculated that they got somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 miles to the gallon, which even by today's standards is a relatively average fuel economy. They claim they only used up 4 tires, which is very hard to believe, but I've seen it accounted over and over again. And my favorite part was 10 rattlesnakes, and there's actually a picture in the book of one of the 2 of them holding up a dead rattlesnake, because they were intruding on the animal's territory. They were going places men really hadn't been before.
Well, the Curved Dash Oldsmobile fits into our collection very well because we're all about demonstrating and displaying and explaining pioneer landmark vehicles. And if there's any car on the floor that fills that bill, it's the Curved Dash Olds.